Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping straight into 2 Kings chapter 23.
And it's quite a chapter. Really dramatic stuff.
Absolutely. We're looking at King Josiah, this huge wave of changes he brings in after a pretty significant find.
Yeah, it's intense. You get this feeling of everything turning on a dime.
Okay, so let's start there. This discovery. It happens in the temple, right?
That's the catalyst. Hilkiah the priest finds what the text calls the Book of the Covenant during temple repairs, it seems, right there in the temple of the Lord.
The Book of the Covenant. That sounds
okay.
important. Understatement, yeah. Think of it as maybe their foundational legal and religious text rediscovered.
So King Josiah gets word about this book. What's his first move? He doesn't just, put it in the library.
No, not at all. The reaction is immediate, big scale. He calls together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem.
Okay, the leadership.
But then he goes further. He himself goes up to the temple, and he brings everyone, priests, prophets, all the people. The text says, from the least to the greatest. Wow. So a full national gathering. And what happens then?
He reads it aloud. The king himself reads in their hearing all the words of the Book of the Covenant that had been found.
Imagine that scene. The king reading this possibly long-lost sacred text to the entire nation gathered there.
Must have been incredibly powerful. You can almost picture the silence, everyone listening.
And it's not just story time. This reading leads to action.
Right.
Immediately.
Right. Straight after, Josiah stands by the tiller, a royal spot, and he renews the covenant right there in the Lord's presence.
Renewing the covenant. What did that actually involve? What's the commitment?
The text is very specific. He pledges to follow the Lord and keep his commands, regulations, and decrees with all his heart and all his soul. Basically, total commitment to what's written in this book they just heard, confirming its words.
A full-on recommitment.
Yeah.
And the people? Are they just spectators?
No, they're participants. Crucially, after the king makes his pledge, the text says all the people pledge themselves to the covenant.
So it's a collective act. King and people together.
Exactly. A national rededication sparked by finding this book.
Okay, covenant renewed. Everyone's pledged. Now, Josiah has this mandate, this rediscovered law. What happens next? This is where the big reforms kick in, I assume.
This is where it gets really intense. He starts immediately right there in the temple, a massive cleanup operation.
Makes sense. Start where the book was found.
He orders Hilkiah, the high priest, the other priests, the temple doorkeepers, basically the whole temple staff, to remove every single thing made for Baal, for Asherah, and for all the starry hosts.
So all the idols, the symbols of other gods, anything connected to pagan or astrological worship, gone.
Completely. And they don't just store them away.
What do they do with them?
They haul them outside Jerusalem, down to the fields in the Kidron Valley, and they burn them.
Burn them. Okay, purification.
And then, interestingly, the ashes are taken to Bethel.
Bethel. Why Bethel?
Yeah.
That was the Northern Kingdom's rival shrine, wasn't it?
Exactly. It feels like a deliberate statement. Taking the remnants of Judah's idolatry and using them to defile the site of Israel's past idolatry. A symbolic link.
Wow. Okay, but it wasn't just objects, right? The text mentions
People.
activities.
Yeah, this is where it gets pretty stark. He tears down the quarters of the male shrine prostitutes.
Wait, inside the temple complex?
Within the temple courts, yes, that's what the text says. Shows how deeply ingrained these practices had become.
That's it. Yes, stark is the right word.
And it adds that this was also where women were doing weaving for the goddess Asherah, so pagan activities involving both men and women right there.
Unbelievable. What else gets cleared out from the temple area?
There were horses dedicated to the sun near the entrance, apparently near the room of an official called Nathan Melech.
Horses for the sun god.
Seems like it. And associated chariots, too. He burned the chariots and got rid of the horses. Another example of sun worship creeping in.
It's amazing how many different forms of non-Yahwistic worship were present. And he didn't stop there. He went after structures built by earlier kings.
Yes, systematically. Altars that kings of Judah had built on the roof near King Ahaz's upper room, and altars his own grandfather, Manasseh, had put in the 2 courts of the temple.
His grandfather, Manasseh, the one known for reintroducing all this stuff after Hezekiah tried to clean it up.
The very same. So Josiah is directly undoing the work of his immediate predecessor, his own family. That takes some conviction.
No kidding. What happened to those altars? Same treatment.
Smashed to pieces. And the rubble. Thrown into the Kidron Valley, along with everything else.
Okay, so the temple is undergoing this radical purge. But it spills out into Jerusalem itself, right?
Oh yeah, the whole city gets the treatment. He gets rid of the pagan priests, the ones appointed by previous kings to serve at the local shrines, the high places.
So these weren't just freelance priests, they were official appointments.
It seems so. They were burning incense at these high places in the towns of Judah and all around Jerusalem.
Worshipping who, exactly?
The text lists Baal, the sun, the moon, the constellations, all the starry hosts. It's a broad sweep of deities and celestial bodies.
And that Asherah pole from the temple, what happened to that specific object?
Right, the one they removed earlier. He takes it down to the Kidron Valley, burns it, grinds it down to powder.
Grinds it to powder, like total destruction.
And then scatters the dust over the graves of the common people. A profound act of desecration, linking it to death and impurity, making sure it couldn't be recovered or revered.
That's intense.
Yeah.
And what about Topheth, the place associated with child sacrifice?
He deals with that too, desecrates it. Topheth in the valley of Ben Hinnom, south of the city.
Desecrates it how and why?
The text says he defiled it, so no one could use it to sacrifice his son or daughter in the fire to Molech. By making the place ritually unclean, he aimed to stop that horrific practice physically and religiously.
Stopping child sacrifice. That's a whole other level of reform.
It really underscores the life and death stakes involved as the text portrays it.
Okay, so Jerusalem is turned upside down, but Josiah's reach extended beyond the capital.
Much further, he went throughout Judah. He brought in the priests who had been serving at the local high places in the towns,
And the high places themselves.
desecrated them. All across Judah, the text specifies from Gibeah to Beersheba, which basically covers the kingdom's territory north to south. Any place priests had burned incense outside Jerusalem.
Even at the city gates. I remember reading something about that.
Yeah, he broke down shrines located right at the city gates, specifically mentions one at the entrance of the gate of Joshua, the city governor, shows how public and accepted these sites were.
What became of those local priests he brought in? Were they punished? Integrated?
It's an interesting detail. The text says these priests from the high places didn't get to serve at the main altar in Jerusalem.
Ah, so sidelined from the central cult.
But they weren't completely cast out. It says they ate unleavened bread with their fellow priests. So provided for, but demoted, perhaps.
A subtle distinction. He also went after some really old sites, didn't he? Linked to Solomon.
Yes. East of Jerusalem, on a hill the text calls the Hill of Corruption, or Mount of Offense. Sites King Solomon himself had built centuries earlier.
Solomon, builder of the first temple.
The very one. Shrines for Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, god of Moab, and Molech, god of the Ammonites. Solomon's foreign wives' gods, essentially.
So Josiah is dismantling things built by the legendary Solomon. Shows how deep these roots went.
Absolutely. And again, smashing the sacred stones, cutting down the Asherah poles, and the text adds, covering the sites with human bones to defile them permanently.
Human bones. Just to make absolutely sure nobody uses that site again.
Maximum defilement. Then he takes his campaign north into the territory of the former kingdom of Israel, particularly Bethel.
Right, Bethel. Jeroboam's rival sanctuary. A place with huge negative symbolism in this narrative.
Exactly. Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who the text blames for leading Israel into sin by setting up the golden calf and altar there. Josiah goes right to the source, you could say.
And does what?
Demolishes the altar in the high place. Burns it, grinds it to powder, burns the Asherah pole. The full treatment we saw in Judah, total destruction.
But there's something else at Bethel. Something prophetic. Involving bones again.
This is a really striking moment. He sees tombs on the hillside nearby. He has the bones taken out
Okay.
and burns them on Jeroboam's altar to defile it.
Why? Just for defilement, or is there more to it?
The text explicitly connects it to an old prophecy. It says, this fulfilled the word of the Lord proclaimed by the man of God way back when Jeroboam first set up the altar. This prophet had foretold that a king from David's line named Josiah would do exactly this, sacrifice priests and burn human bones on that altar.
So Josiah is consciously, or at least the text presents him as, fulfilling ancient prophecy.
That's exactly how the narrative frames it, linking his actions directly to a divine decree from centuries before.
Incredible. Does he desecrate all the tombs?
No, there's an exception. He sees one particular tombstone, asks about it, and is told it's the tomb of that very man of God from Judah who prophesied against Bethel.
Ah, the prophet himself.
And Josiah says, leave it alone, don't let anyone disturb his bones. He also spares the bones of a prophet from Samaria buried with him. Respect for the true prophets amidst the destruction of false worship.
A fascinating detail. And his purge continued beyond Bethel into Samaria.
Yes, he went through the towns of Samaria, removing and defiling all the high place shrines built by the kings of Israel, sites that, again, provoked the Lord to anger.
And the priests serving there, what happened to them?
The text is blunt here. It says he slaughtered those priests on their own altars and burned human bones on them, like at Bethel. Utter eradication and defilement.
Slaughtered them. Wow. This is ruthless. A complete violent religious revolution.
It's presented as total commitment to eliminating rival worship by any means necessary, according to the text. Then, after all that, he returns to Jerusalem.
After the sweeping, kingdom-wide, even cross-border purge, what's the culmination? Is there a positive expression of this renewed covenant?
Yes, the Passover. Josiah commands all the people, celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God, but do it exactly as it is written in this book of the covenant.
Back to the book. And was this just a standard Passover?
Far from it. The text makes a huge claim here. It says, not since the days of the judges, nor throughout the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah had any such Passover been observed.
So the most authentic, correctly celebrated Passover in centuries, maybe ever, according to the kingdom's historians.
That's the claim. Unprecedented in its scale and adherence to the rediscovered law. This happens in Josiah's 18th year, the high point of the reform.
A grand national celebration marking the return to the covenant. After detailing all that, does the text give a final summary of everything Josiah got rid of?
It does. It pulls back for a moment and says he got rid of mediums, spiritists, household gods, teraphim idols, basically all the detestable things seen in Judah and Jerusalem. A comprehensive list.
And explicitly linking it all back to the book one last time.
Yes, stating clearly it was all done to fulfill the requirements of the law written in the book that Hilkiah the priest had discovered. No ambiguity about the motivation presented.
And the final verdict on Josiah himself as a king.
This is where the narrator gives that stunning evaluation. Neither before nor after Josiah was there a king like him who turned to the Lord as he did, with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his strength, in accordance with all the law of Moses.
The absolute gold standard.
Yeah.
The best king ever, according to this text's criteria. Unparalleled devotion.
Couldn't be higher praise within this framework.
Okay, so perfect king, perfect reforms, perfect Passover, highest praise possible. And then the chapter hits us with a massive but.
Yeah, it's a jarring turn. Despite everything Josiah did, all his faithfulness, the text says the Lord still didn't turn back from his fierce anger against Judah.
It wasn't enough. Why? What reason does the text give?
It points backwards to Manasseh. Because of all that Manasseh had done to provoke him to anger, Josiah's grandfather's legacy of sin, according to the text, still carried this weight that even Josiah's piety couldn't erase.
So the declaration stood that God would remove Judah, reject Jerusalem, reject the temple, despite Josiah cleaning it.
That's what the text states. The Lord's declared judgment remained. It's a tough passage, suggesting perhaps the limits of individual reform against accumulated history or a predetermined divine course in this narrative.
Wow. Okay, so the narrative kind of leaves that hanging and then tells us how Josiah dies.
Briefly mentions his other deeds are in the official records, and then, his death. He goes out to meet Pharaoh Necho of Egypt at Megiddo. Necho was heading north, maybe to help Assyria against Babylon.
Yeah.
They fight, and Pharaoh Necho kills Josiah at Megiddo.
Just like that. This uniquely righteous king dies in battle. Seems almost anticlimactic, or maybe abrupt.
It does feel sudden after the buildup. His servants bring his body back to Jerusalem in a chariot and bury him.
And the kingdom immediately moves on. Who takes over?
The people of the land make his son Jehoahaz king. He's 23, reigns just 3 months.
3 months?
Yeah.
And his assessment? Please don't say.
Yep. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his ancestors had done. The pattern snaps right back.
Unbelievable. After everything Josiah did. And his reign ends quickly.
Very quickly. Pharaoh Necho, the same one who killed Josiah, comes back or exerts his authority, puts Jehoahaz in chains at Riblah in Syria, stopping his reign.
So Egypt is now calling the shots.
Completely. Necho imposes this huge tax on Judah, 100 talents of silver, a talent of gold, a crippling amount, makes Judah a vassal state.
And installs a new king.
Puts Jehoahaz's brother, another son of Josiah named Eliakim, on the throne, and Necho changes his name to Jehoiakim.
Changing his name. A real sign of dominance.
Definitely. Jehoiakim is 25, reigns 11 years.
And his verdict, let me guess.
He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his ancestors had done. Same judgment. The text notes he taxed the people heavily to pay off Pharaoh Necho. And Jehoahaz the brother, he dies exiled in Egypt.
So the chapter ends there. Josiah's incredible, singular reign of reform and devotion, praised like no other, followed instantly by sons who do evil, foreign domination, and that looming judgment still hanging over them, apparently not averted by Josiah's actions.
It's a powerful narrative arc. This peak of faithfulness immediately followed by a return to the status quo ante and foreign oppression, reinforcing that textual theme of consequences for past sins persisting.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? You have this king who does everything the discovered text seemingly requires, gets unparalleled praise, yet the negative trajectory for the nation, as presented, isn't fundamentally altered. What did that say? About the power of one person's commitment versus maybe the sheer weight of history or collective sin? Or is it about how divine plans or prophecies, once set in motion in the text, play out regardless? Something to definitely wrestle with, that contrast between Josiah's immense efforts and what happened right after he was gone.